Welcome to our podcast, which is going to be a conversation on SASE with David Ma from EliteOps. My name is John Kellerhals. I'm President Emeritus at the Chicago InfraGard chapter, as well as the regional rep for the National Organization of InfraGard. And David, would you introduce yourself to us?
Absolutely. David Mom for EliteOps. I am the CXO Advisor. Joined EliteOps about 6 months ago. Prior to that, I had the privilege of working for Charles Schwab as a technical director, and prior to that, Northrop Grumman. So I've got roughly about 24 plus years of core networking and network security experience and zero trust implementations over the course of the last 8 years.
Well, welcome, David. Thrilled to be on a podcast with you to pick your brains on a lot of different things. I know we wanted to talk about the Secure Access Service Edge, as well as some other activities. Can you give us a little background in terms of what Secure Access Service Edge means to you and to your organization?
Absolutely. So generally speaking about SASE, we look at what is the SASE imperative, right? What is the defining enterprise reason and justification as to why we see organizations and industries today leveraging SASE to improve and mature their network and their network security stack. In addition to this, I do want to focus a little bit about the market focus, the business drivers behind why many companies are engaging with SASE, the realization and the maturity of organizations and the SASE products that are currently out there. I would like to specifically speak about the Zscaler product portfolio as well. And then would like to align all of this behind a zero trust alignment, right? Understanding how does SASE play in the context of a zero trust framework, how we can actually look at SASE as a enabler to a zero trust framework and where companies currently are focused on that journey and transformation.
Okay, thank you, David. Could you go a little deeper into, what are the infrastructure required for doing SASE, and how does this work for fully remote, hybrid? How does it work for completely in the office type activities?
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the catalyst. Why SASE became such a major buzzword over the course of the last couple of years. So we all experienced a COVID experience. We saw companies being forced to provide mobile workforce capabilities in a couple months worth of time. And so we saw a lot of companies really kind of investing on that remote access capability. However, where a lot of industries are stuck at was how did you currently support remote access and capabilities? Well, generally over traditional VPNs, jump box VDIs and such. And so that's really where SASE comes into play because with this new industry requirement and demand for remote access and capabilities, companies needed a better way to connect their remote mobile workforce by providing not only the traditional capabilities that users had when they're on-prem, but also to provide an additional layer of network security, whether or not that was visibility, the capability of doing enforcement via policy, or even the ability just to have telemetry data enough to understand the context around what your mobile workforce was doing. And so that was really kind of the one of the introductions as to why SASE mattered was how do we position our organizations to be able to, on a dime, transition between an on-prem mentality to an off-prem mentality and vice versa. Because fast forward a couple months or a couple of years, and we're now at return to office. And so with that, what happens to all those investments that we traditionally made with some of those legacy, some of the older technologies that were out there that supported the mobile workforce? And so that paradigm shift is what has really encouraged a lot of companies to start looking at what can SASE do for us, right? How does it streamline our ability to operate and to support our mobile workforce and really to support the organization?
Okay, thank you, David. From a user perspective, your typical office worker, how
Mhm.
do they know or experience SASE? Or is it completely,
Uh,
in the background where it just happens, right? The magic.
that's a that's a great question. And so it really depends on who you because at the end of the day, the goal of SASE and the goal of really all of this zero trust type initiatives is how do you improve the user experience, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the user experience that defines the adoptability of some of this technology, because this is not an easy change. SASE is definitely not an easy change, and something that we should definitely spend some time on to understand kind of the ramifications of what organizations need to look at when you're looking into SASE and how you can achieve the best outcomes. But that really drives the ultimate goal of how do I provide common user experience, common network security and controls, and visibility to my entire workforce. And it's no longer a question of on-prem versus off-prem, because my workforce can work from anywhere. And the question is, how do I enable that? And how do I gain the same type of capabilities I had when I was on-prem? That's really the story here, is how do we provide common user experience, a good user experience, and provide that maturity where we have visibility and the ability to control our traffic.
Excellent. You brought up the whole COVID experience that we all survived or lived through, however you want to say it, right?
Yes.
We, at the organization I was at, we were very much a shop where everybody met in person all the time. Very limited collaboration tools, very limited anything. And then we immediately overnight went to, a VPN, which our infrastructure was not set up to support, but we put together what we
Mm,
needed to make it happen, just like every organization did. And when we started the return to office activity, just in our organization, we did that probably 7 months after it was remote, which was very quick. And one of the challenges is, am I in the office, I have to do this. When I'm home, I have to do this. When I'm somewhere else, I have to do this. And there was a lot
mhm.
of confusion. So walk me through the simplified process for SASE for that user experience, right? If you're
Well,
flopping
John, I have
around
a
a lot.
question for you. Yeah, absolutely. I have a question for you, John.
Sure.
So when everybody went remote, what are some of the key technologies that companies needed to mature and enhance quickly? Right? Those were collaboration platforms. So
Right.
if you notice, a lot of companies started thinking, well, how do I provide collaboration to my workforce? Where historically, people would just connect to WebEx, connect to these various type of collaboration platforms, but now you're forced to provide a more vibrant, robust capability to enable the workforce to collaborate properly. And so
Right.
that really falls into a more technical conversation about
Yes.
what are some of the applications and things that you leverage, right? That we had to enable quickly in a remote type of style that now needs to be secured. Well, most companies weren't ready to switch on a dime like that, because things like voice and video, where historically voice and video are not recommended to send through third parties and proxying and various others, really requires that IP to IP connectivity. Now, many customers enjoy that because when you're on-prem, everything's connected in the network. You had clean path to what you needed to get to. But when you moved outside of the office, well, the only way that companies were able to provide that level of capability was through VPN, right? Site to
Right.
site type tunneling. Well,
Correct.
there's some pros and cons to that. When you go
Yes.
into a VPN type environment, is you lack all of these inline capabilities that you would generally get out of a SASE platform. And so now organizations are sitting there thinking, how do I secure the remote workforce now? Because I can no longer protect what you connect to, John. When you're at home, you're probably connected to your own little switch or connect to your own little Wi-Fi. So I don't
Yep.
really have a lot of visibility to your network, nor do I want you to connect to your network. I want you to connect to my network in a secure way. And so that by itself has really changed the way that customers are looking at the technology. It's no longer just I gave you access, right? Now it's more than that. Now that I gave you that access, how do I ensure that I can provide this access to you in a meaningful way, in a secure manner, so that as you work, doesn't matter where you work from, I can provide the same level of experience to you. So that really has
Yeah.
been, to me, kind of the cascading waterfall effect of COVID, is that companies started looking at more collaboration. They started realizing, hey, remote workforce, how do I ensure that John is not streaming his Netflix while he's also working on my content, right? How do I get DLP involved in all of this in a meaningful way so I'm not bogging down the workforce? How do I ensure that I can control what John has access to and that I know what John has access to? And how do I provision that quickly? And so that has evolved. That conversation has evolved and it continues to evolve. And I think we're at a point now where companies are really just trying to understand what is the strategic and business value and outcomes that I was truly looking for through this type of you know integration of a new product.
Yep. And David, you brought up some very good points about the whole voice component and the collaboration tool sharing. Our company, like I had mentioned before at the time, was very adverse to any type of collaboration. They wanted the face-to-face, right? We had an unbelievable investment in, desk voice phones. So
Hmm.
when people had to go remote, that didn't exist anymore, and people were
Yeah.
all scrambling, right? We had to bump up our VPN capacity, more
Hmm.
than 10x
Yep.
on what it was before. We had a collaboration tool. If you might imagine, for 3,400 employees, we had 20 shared WebEx accounts, so there was no collaboration. So in 2 weeks, we had to ramp that up to 750 accounts to do stuff. And at the same time, if you remember, we were using WebEx. Teams was coming out, and all the sharing type activities uh,
Yep.
generated all kinds of DLP issues because you click this or you do that, and all of a sudden now you've just shared everything with everyone without even realizing it, right?
Exactly.
So
And if I could add to, you hit the nail on the head here. This is not just a story for now. This is a story for tomorrow as well. Because what's
right,
happening with collaboration now? AI, right? Now you have all of these AI gadgets that are sitting on your collaboration calls, collecting and listening for information. And so, with all of these new robust capabilities, the continued effort is how do I secure it, right? How do I ensure that I have control over this? That really is a story, is that as we're maturing, as we're finding new avenues in the industry to build more robust capabilities that provide a better user experience, that provide the capability for John to work anywhere in the world, is that how do I layer security on top of this, right? And that's a continued conversation that won't ever die. I think that's something that today it's AI. Yesterday it was, I got to share content. How do I do that securely? Today it's how do I ensure that the gadgets and the AI that I leverage is controlled in a fashion that I have the ability to understand what my users have access to. And tomorrow it's going to be a different story as well. But I think this is something that is a part of the story of SASE is not only is it transformational from a network security lens, it's also transformational in the way that I look at networking, traditional networking, right? Enterprise level, cloud, all of this matters because it's transformational in the fact that it's disruptive, right? This technology is disruptive and it really depends on how you as an individual and an organization are able to leverage that technology to get the best outcomes needed because not everybody needs all 100, let's say 100 capabilities of SASE. Some of them may only
right,
focus on 20, but the question is, are you getting the 20 that you focused on? And
right.
so that is an evolving situation for us.
Yes. So let's talk for just a second about the infrastructure involved with it. Prior to COVID, most people were on-prem, all kinds of appliances everywhere in a data center, backup data center to, if you had a fire that took place, right, you had to continue doing what you had to do at a different location, right? So,
Hmm. Hmm.
we went to, the remote force, and therefore you had to do some stuff, and people really kind of jumped into the cloud at that point. And now with the return to office, give me a little insight in terms of whether there's on-premise appliances that are in use, or is it all cloud-based? How does that, what are you seeing happening?
So, luckily, with the privilege of working with EliteOps and having access to many enterprise and commercial customers, we've had a good amount of information to be able to understand where we see a lot of customers going, where their pain points are, and how the evolution of the network stack essentially has transitioned from pre-COVID to post-COVID. Great question, though, because what I believe is not a lot of customers and people understand that we generally have not had this type of opportunity over the course of the last 20 to 30 years of network infrastructure is this idea of being able to completely transition and rethink the way that your network operates, right? How data flows from one point to the other. Case in point, as you noted, with and cloud's always been an initiative for many companies, whether or not that was a measure of cost savings or virtualization, per use type of consumption. The real driver now is how am I able to present my applications and my data in such a way that allows users to get good performance, right? And accessibility wherever you are. it's a little bit less of the cost savings of cloud now. It's more about the utility of cloud, right? How am I able to function in cloud and provide a better organization structure, application stack, security stack, and a unified experience or interface for users to collaborate with them. And so where we see a lot of enterprise customers are, it's not so much how much more do I need to put in cloud? How do I take what's in cloud and transition it to be more internet friendly? And let me explain that one to you.
Yes,
So
please.
let's talk about this evolution of networking, right? It was the LAN WAN segments, MPLS, that was all the rave. Even when you went to public cloud, many companies didn't go straight internet. When we went to cloud, many companies started doing point-to-point circuits or overlays or tunnels to these clouds. But the problem is the network technology and configurations that support those environments are not necessarily built for today. They were built for yesterday. So they're still bidirectional tunnels. They're full tunnels to your cloud, and you may have seen a firewall sitting in front of it doing, basic, if you had layer 7 capabilities, type of blocking and tackling. But that's not where we need to go, right? Because that's really just implementing old technology, old configuration, old ways of doing things, and applying it to today's solutions. Well, I would argue cloud was for the purpose of you being able to present application and services, right, from these geolocations to anywhere or any user segments in the world. Well, if you were planning on doing that, well, what's the greatest way to do that or achieve that in today's world for transport? It's internet, right? Internet now has been it's lower cost, it's more of a commodity, right? And it's more available at a lower cost so that companies are not forced to say, well, I need an MPLS circuit, I need a private circuit to achieve the same level of performance control that now today can be achieved using overlay tunnels with the same layer of control, things like through Zscaler. Whether or not we have the ability to be able to decide where these tunnels are built, in addition to that, be able to provide end user type controls where we have identity as a forefront of measuring who you are and what you have access to, and then ultimately leading the conversation so that it's more of a user to app connectivity method rather than a user to network connectivity method. And so that is what's changing the way that we view the network, the traditional network, and how services like SASE allow us to evolve and build on top of what already exists.
Yeah, great description of the fundamental shift that we're experiencing. In the same organization I was talking about before for going remote for COVID, we had a heavily organized structure that relied on MPLS. And I deployed SD-WAN throughout the entire environment with, internet, right? Much faster speeds, much more control over how you can do it, much higher resiliency and failover for doing activities, right? We also did an ERP system migration to the cloud that was on-premise before. And one of the things that is incredibly important for people to think about is wherever you're going to host it in the cloud, geography matters. The ability to have the response of a system like that, and let's face it, the ERP systems are very data intensive in a lot of cases.
Indeed.
And so the business made a choice before I had joined to use a large data center on the East Coast and then a large data center on the West Coast. And, we were based in Chicago. And I said, why would we choose that? Because now you have a minimum of 40 milliseconds of latency built in for
Hmm.
every single time you're doing something. And at the time, business really didn't understand it. Well, what's 40 milliseconds? Well, 40
Exactly.
milliseconds is is not much if I'm doing one thing, but when you're constantly doing it, right? So there's some really important things that need to be looked at from a standpoint of how it's going to work and what the user experience is going to be. So let's talk a little bit in terms of how SASE helps with that, and also, in terms of Zscaler, what does that do to address those latency concerns that people have started to see? And it didn't matter whether you're on MPLS or if you're going 1,000 miles, the speed of light doesn't change. You're still limited to that
Indeed.
capability. And if you're going to
Indeed.
go to India or somewhere other place, you're talking a lot more latency. So let's talk about what Zscaler can do for that.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what Zscaler offers, right? At its principle, there are some foundational capabilities that come out of box for Zscaler. This includes ZIA, which is the internet access or the proxy services, and then there's ZPA, which is private access. Now, the true value that you get out of ZPA, which is completely different than the way you view VPNs these days, is that it's more of a reverse proxy where the endpoints actually don't know what they have access to. They don't know the destination, right? And you obfuscate all of that critical data that's in your organization while still enabling the ability for users to connect to personal applications or private applications in your org. In addition to this, they wrap all of this stuff up with ZDX, which is the digital experience. It is what I would consider your Swiss Army knife of your network and of your users and your applications. It does a really great job of bringing in what you historically had hosted on 5 different type of application network monitoring
Yes.
tools. It brings a lot of that information into one pane that gives you a quicker way to assess and isolate issues. Now, with these 3 principal capabilities, what we're seeing is companies are starting to integrate. And let's rewind the clock a little bit here. Let's talk a little bit about the drivers as to why some of these companies are even looking at products like Zscaler.
Yeah.
Generally, we're hearing from the market, it's really tech displacement and consolidation, trying to find cost savings. And so, let's rewind to how proxies used to work. You'd have a physical box sitting in your data center that would essentially be proxying all of your traffic. Well, we're moving away from that, right? We're trying to figure out, well, bringing everybody back to my data center just to be able to achieve proxy-like capabilities. Now I want this at the endpoint. John, I don't know, you probably remember this as much as I do. And it's kind of irony that we say this, but back in the day when IBM came out with dumb terminals back to a mainframe, right? So you had, low intelligent, low process memory devices that really was just the interface back to a mainframe that housed all that data.
Yeah.
Do you know we're going back to that? We're
Yes.
essentially going back to that, right? And
Yeah.
the beauty of this is the mentality change of I am a little bit less concerned about just one aspect of where my data resides, whether that's data at rest, data in transit. I want the full picture. And so now we're looking at what kind of protections can I involve at the endpoint? And this is where I think there's a cross breed of what SASE does and what it's planning to do in the future. For instance, Zscaler now is able to do endpoint DLP. They're able to do they have been able to do device posture, machine tunneling, and all these endpoint capabilities that you historically didn't get from a proxy server. And
Right.
so that opens the door up a bit. So I mentioned earlier, the drivers that we're seeing in the market today is customers are just looking to replace something. And that story generally starts at proxy. I want to replace my existing legacy proxy servers because number one, they're outdated. I need something that's more aligned to the way that my workforce works today, which is from anywhere in the world. And so even though the conversations start there, they start realizing the value that this product brings. For instance, private access is a great way to replace traditional VPN, where you had
Yeah.
bidirectional tunneling, firewall-like rules. Now you take in some of that proxy level capability where you're thinking layer 7 now. Now you're thinking at applications. We're not just using IP addresses anymore. We're not just using host names anymore. We're starting to look at application identification. This started back when next gen firewalls came out, right? Next
Yes.
gen firewalls were all about application ID and being able to build policies via
Yes.
application. Well, we've evolved past that now. Now we know we can do that. Now the question is, how do we build a great framework in driving a policy that addresses network security risks, even maybe my appetite, or my company's appetite of what we consider whitelisted type of categorical sites versus blacklisted. You bring that intelligence now to the VPN paradigm, where now you can say, hey, the same level of visibility and control I have from the proxy side, I can now deliver that on the VPN side of the house, where I can say, John, you have access to applications 1, 2, and 3. And these 3 applications are packaged so that people that are on your role will always be allocated with these 3 applications. And so that then leads into another conversation about taking a step back and not just building ad hoc capabilities and policies to drive access. It's now to step back and say, wait a minute, I have an opportunity here to look at a framework and say, let's say there's 20 different categories, provided by Zscaler. There's far more than that. But for the purpose of this conversation, let's say there's 20 categories of sites in the world. Well, now I can predefine access for all 20 sites and then start mapping them into user roles, right? Intents, use cases, my organization. So now, John, let's say I have all 20 documented in my policy framework. John, you need access to this other category that you generally don't have access to. Well, today, how does that work? You probably have to open up a troubleshoot ticket after you've gotten that error. You have to collect some data. Let's hope that the user is knowledgeable enough to even provide the right context. But then you send that off in a troubleshoot ticket and you wait, right? And that probably goes through some help desk, level 1, level 2 evaluation, has to get approved. So it has to go through a string of approvals. And if you're in a company that's mature enough that has taken the time to govern their policies based upon, let's say, GRC or any kind of compliance requirement, then that will take some additional time. And then you get approved, and then you're going to have to wait a couple of days for provisioning. All right. So that's how generally, we see a lot of operations address web exceptions. But let's say, John, I have all of this pre-configured as policies, and I can simply say, John, I can automate your request for a web exception. I can go through the approval process and automatically build automation so that, John, I just need to add you to a group and then you have access because the policy is already there. It's already pre-configured, right? All the controls are already there. That is where I think the conversation needs to go, is that people need to stop looking at these products as fit for purpose, just that one thing. This now enables you to take a step back and look at a framework, look at the hierarchy of how you govern risk at your company, and start building policies, configurations, and frameworks that align to that so that we can build better efficiency in supporting the customer user base or the user base, right? So exception
Yes.
requests, we can minimize that. We can pre-plan. We already know what the risk levels are for all of our categories. We are no longer in a situation where we have to stop and say, has anyone evaluated this category? Like, how do we feel about this? What do we allow? What do we not allow? You can establish all of that in the forefront of these implementations now. And that's where I think the true value of this technology is. It's not just the technology, but it's what this technology now enables organizations to do.
Yep. So, David, you triggered a couple of thoughts, when we were talking about this, about some of the challenges that always existed, right? From a security
Hmm.
perspective, everybody wants to provide only the access somebody needs, so that you don't have inadvertent access. Everybody wants it granular. But when you're bringing somebody on board to your organization, the person doing the hiring doesn't really know everything that they may or may not need for that new employee. So what typically happens is, oh, Joe over here, just give him the same thing that Joe has. Never mind that Joe might have been a
Exactly.
developer before or has over provisioned or hasn't been looked at. And again, if you don't do that type of approach and you just do we'll try this, right? Now you have a
Hmm.
super high level of frustration and a high touch point and a high inefficient process to get somebody onboarded. So there's always a problem with that activity. And then when somebody leaves, how do
Indeed.
you turn off all the stuff because you haven't measured it?
Exactly.
The the
Exactly.
other the other challenges that everybody has is, even though a lot of organizations are on the journey to the cloud, and some are actually on a journey to repopulate data centers and get out of the cloud for different activities. But those types of things back and forth always produce challenges in terms of,
Mhm.
something that works or it doesn't work. And I think the user expectations have really ratcheted up from what they were before, and I want this access and I want it 30 seconds ago, right? So
Exactly.
how do
Exactly.
you actually do that activity without having a giant staff to constantly look and monitor? Can this person get to this inappropriate site? And when I say inappropriate,
Hmm.
most places say, hey, there's no reason for our people to go to alcohol sites, for an example, right? And then, the
Hmm.
business comes back and says, no, we sell our products to the beverage industry. They absolutely need it. So how do we do this versus that? So let's talk a
Ah,
little bit about
yes.
how you do that in a manner that doesn't take an army of people to constantly provide access and exceptions to the policies you want to do.
Great question. Great question. Um, it really goes back to customization, right? It's all about
Yeah.
how much customization can I implement without bogging down my company's ability to execute and support our users,
Yes.
right? That's the question. Well, I go back to this concept of half the things that most companies bring up. hey, this person needs access to this that we didn't know about, it's because you didn't know about it, right?
Right.
We didn't know about it. That's the point. And so step number one is know what you don't know about your traffic. Know what you don't know about the data classifications that traverse your network and the type of data that your users leverage. That's step number one. So how do I gain visibility? Step number two is with the tools afforded to me, we'll use the example of Zscaler here. So I have this ability now where I can leverage additional context in my decision making. For instance, you've probably heard long ago, when Active Directory wanted to start using, extensible AD attributes to define better ways to build policy or make decisions. Well, I would extend that conversation here. We can use that information now, right? We can actually effectively use things like your department. Maybe HR always has a subset of applications that all HR personnel will have access to. Okay, then now you can package that up into a policy. Now let's add an additional level of customization. We're not just looking at department. Now let's say John is in this role that is unique because he is a power user. And so as a power user, maybe that's defined as data classification. Maybe it's all about what type of data does John have access to? Maybe it's not just about systems of record. Maybe it's the type of data. And so introducing these type of new capabilities offers companies the ability to step back and pre-plan for this, right? And say, why don't we look at all of our user communities today and understand what are low level, low hanging fruit that I can leverage to build quick and easy profiling of my users. And maybe we start at the department level because that's very simple. And
Yeah.
now we can implement follow me entitlement. So John, the policies I built for you, it's because you were an HR and you're a power user. But let's say within the same organization, you move now to engineering. You're no longer HR, you're in engineering. Well, historically, how did we manage that? Well, you have to put a ticket in and good luck getting somebody
Not
to
well.
remove you from exactly. Good luck getting somebody to remove you from all these AD groups and then add you to these other AD groups. And none of it's really being tracked in any kind of meaningful way. It's just a troubleshoot ticket, right? No one's really understanding. John asked for these other applications. Let us hope that we have the right governance in place to ensure that people with the right eyes are granting him that access, right? This allows us to take that complexity and simplify it a little bit. Why? Well, let's take a step back again. John, we define certain departments to have certain whitelists. So at the end of the day, if John's department changes, we can automatically decommission all of the groups that he would have been a part of as HR, and then add him to the new group of all the applications that he needs access to from an engineering department. Okay, but the story doesn't stop there. Let's do some additional context. John is not customer forward facing. He has no clearance, and I don't want him to have access to PI data, right? And so maybe it's less about what John has access to, systems that he has access to. And it's more about what do I not want him to be able to view or read or send. And maybe that is based upon data classification. And that's somewhere where we'd leverage something like DLP, right? Or even if I want to go as far as, Zscaler has this great offering right out of box that a lot of users don't leverage. File type control, very simple stuff. Maybe, John, I don't want you to send zip files going back and forth, right? I don't want you to send any encapsulated files. I don't want you to send password protected files, right? I need to be able to see exactly what you're sending. Maybe I don't want you sending movie files and video files and audio files, right? We have that level of control. And so, this is a bit of the drinking from the fire hose a little bit. As an organization, you have to understand strategically what are the outcomes that you're looking to achieve, and then understand what are all the areas that I need to look at. Because when I start having these conversations at an executive level, a lot of the strategy, although they're single one-liners, right? I want a better business outcome by achieving this kind of KPI metric, or maybe I actually value NPS scores and I want to know what my user experience looks like. And some of those are the high-level drivers, but trying to water that down as it goes down the organization and to translate it into actual technical work is a different story. And that really requires some level of expertise and knowledge in the environment, knowledge of the organization that you work for, and then being able to provide these type of solutions in a meaningful way. because you could sit there as an engineer and tout out all these technologies. Half the room's not going to understand you, right? You have to be able to translate that in a way that people can understand. And that's a little bit a part of the work that I do here at EliteOps is that translation of taking strategic and business outcomes and understanding what does that translate to in a technical and strategic manner, and then vice versa. How do I take the technical work and translate it in a way that executives and the business understands and it's meaningful to them?
Yep. So David, if I can summarize a little bit, what we've been talking about is how do we put controls in place without adding too much friction, right? The users hate friction, and
Absolutely.
nobody likes MFA, where you have to do this with a different channel, and you go
Indeed.
on and on and on, right? And what I've seen and experienced is the more friction you introduce in the name of security, that is only recognized as beneficial after an event happens that gets people to focus on saying, well, maybe we should allow more friction so that we don't have these events, right? So
Hey,
from the
John,
standpoint,
in the last 20 years, when did you ever hear network security being an enabler for anything? Right? We were always the bump in the road.
right.
Um,
And so when you put too much friction in play, right, there's sections of the business that just go off on their own and do the shadow IT where they're going to do
oh,
what they want to do
yes.
anyways, right? And so the shadow IT creates much larger security risks than, if you actually interface and work with the business directly to say, hey, we understand you want to do this. Please do it this way versus, the old security mindset was, no,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
can't have it, right? So
Yeah, well,
from the standpoint of the friction, the shadow IT, and it's even worse now with all the different apps that are available for people to do. Oh, I can do this and I can do that. And yeah, what are you giving up and what are you sharing unknowingly when that uh,
yep.
comes a plate, right? And those discussions regarding AI, just the giant vacuuming up of all these different seemingly innocuous type of things that when they're assembled, all that data goes into something that is intelligent from a standpoint
Hmm.
of I've built a profile that nobody actually recognized as something that was going to happen. So let's talk for just a minute in terms
Sure.
of, what does the Zscaler thing do? And I say the thing, right? What does that
Hmm.
do to minimize the friction and provide the protection so that people don't just bypass it entirely?
Absolutely. Let's go back to your original statement. Why is there shadow IT? More reasons than not, shadow IT is there because the original service offerings was not conducive, was not easy to implement, or people just didn't have an answer, right?
Right.
Lack of maturity or lack of even having a solution. That's where that's where Zscaler really starts, right? Is we no longer have that conversation of we don't have a solution. It's more about we do have a solution, right? And it's a repeatable and governed environment because we've already pre-planned for it. So let's use some of these examples, and let's use some real world examples.
Yeah.
So I'm working for an enterprise company right now where I'm assisting them in deploying things like VDI, right? VDI integration, VDI protections. And so historically, how did we do this? Well, historically, if I had, let's say, a third party, I wanted to onboard a third party, and I'm going to give them access to my environment via VDI because I don't trust them enough to put a VPN tunnel up. I don't have any agreements like that. I just want to give them a jump box, and that jump box is going to give them access to what they need. Well, you just had this conversation probably at a network level, and the network guys said, okay, yeah, we've got some VDI out there. Go talk to virtualization guys, and they'll have to create a new tenant for you. Okay, great. Well, who's going to govern the access? Who's going to govern the restrictions, right? Who's going to control the content? Now it's a different story. And if you
Right.
kind of recall, remember that old meme back then, and it shows you like a swing set with a tire, and there's different frames, but it's different interpretations of what the customer wanted. And so
Oh,
like
yes.
yeah, okay. So it's a little bit of that. Is that and there's a loss of context as it transitions through these different teams, right? The
Yep.
original deliverable gets watered down or something doesn't get captured. By the time security gets involved, now the policies may not be aligned to what the intent of that use case was. And so
Yep.
let's talk about how Zscaler improves on all this. And this is a really key point. I hope our viewers have a chance to fully understand. Right? It's not just the rules of the road. We're not just building a road. The road's already there. The question is, how are we intelligently providing the construct for customers to be able to build these type of environments in a secure manner. And so let's fast forward and say, now I don't care where that VDI sits because I have the ability to fully control what that VDI has access to on the LAN side and the WAN side, right? So now you decouple where the actual VDI sits. Now it's more of a question of, are we placing the VDI in an environment that we can scale and
Yes.
provide good bandwidth and accessibility to our users, right? That's really where the network is going now. Now the security portion of this is falling on a different umbrella. Now this is kind of the SASE environment where Zscaler can come in the door and say, it doesn't matter where your users are. It doesn't matter where your VDIs are. I can provide end-to-end control. That's where everything changes because now I'm decoupling all of these environmental that are defining the requirement of the solution. Now it's more of that's no longer a dependency for me. Now it's more about, do I have the knowledge and the visibility and the capabilities to enforce the level of posturing and profiling that I want that can be scalable. And so introduce Zscaler. Let's say if I have a tenant configuration that says this tenant's only for third parties, and I can create profiles for every single company, right? And I can manage these under a unified and orchestrated policy, right? Both on the ZPA side, which is again that private access capability, kind of VPN-like capability, as well as the WAN side, the proxy traffic, right? Governing all of that under one policy and being able to manage all of this under one window pane opens the door up to say, is this a repeatable process? Again, wrap the fact that every one of these personas are driven by some kind of security landscape, whether or not that is a posture profile associated to data classification, posture profile on the type of employee you are. Maybe you're a third party contractor, maybe you're an enterprise user, maybe you're a branch site user. By wrapping the technical orchestration via policy and client configuration and management and wrapping that around some kind of security border, if you will, on saying this
Yep.
is the package and making this a repeatable process, that's where you get your acceleration. Again, thinking less about the technical capabilities it's offering you and more about what are the process and workflows that it now enables you to do. Because now I can step back and say, I have full visibility of all my user personas. I can rebuild my personas and I can apply them at a software level, no longer network level where it's VLANs, and what network segment are you in and what routing do you have in place. It's less of that now and more about, let's not think about the network constraints. Let's think about, what do I intend this user group or persona to have access to? So I think people need to look at less of the technical capabilities because that comes out of box. That's going to happen anyways, right? It's an overlay, guys, right? It's an overlay of the existing network. You're building better tunnels, more intelligent tunnels. It's about, what am I doing in that tunnel to gain the most advantage, right, out of that traffic? Am I getting the visibility I need? Is it meaningful? Are we doing something with that traffic? Or is it just going to a log server that no one's really looking at, right? And so you start building these better workflows and processes so that you
Yep.
can mature the product and ultimately provide the level of efficiencies that you can gain out of integrating people, process, and and configurations.
Yep. No, all great points that you were saying there. David, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball here that every
Sure.
organization I've ever been with throws, the organization that's chartered with protecting the organizational from a data and security perspective. When you have one environment that you know and understand, right, you can make some intelligent choices. But with all the mergers and acquisitions that are happening all the time, right, we've ingested organizations that had a security posture substantially less than what we had, right? And so we would need to bring them up as quickly as you can. From the standpoint of other places, sometimes we'd actually come in and take over an organization that had newer technology than we did, right? And so
Mm.
you don't want to have them have to step backwards. Let's talk a
Yep.
little bit about how you manage completely different workflows, completely different operating systems or versions of different things, right? If you look
Sure.
at, let's say going back in time, Windows 7 was what everybody had, and then an organization bringing in had Windows 10, right? Or
Yeah.
pick whatever you want, 10 or 11, you pick whatever it is. How do you do that merging, if you will, of all those technologies in a manner that provides you the best without maybe sacrificing what a new organization is actually doing better than what your current rest of the organization is doing.
Absolutely. This is where I think Zscaler plays a really big part, and something that to me is a market leader in this area. So let's specifically talk about M&A activities, right? So we're
Yep.
about to acquire another company. Um, how do we historically used to do this, guys? Well, the first thing that always comes up, and luckily I've had the privilege of running a couple of these acquisitions and such. It's
Yep.
IP conflict. It's about the network first and
Yes.
foremost. It's not really about the
Yes.
application data. It's about how do I connect to that network so I can even start getting access to some of their stuff? And how do I ensure that we do this in a way that doesn't impact my current infrastructure? And so things like how do you de-risk IP conflicts in your organization? Okay, well, that's one. Okay, secondarily to that, well, what is it that I actually need access to? Because day one, right, there's usually an expectation of phases or rings of access that are supposed to be
Yep.
enabled as the time goes on. And so this allows you really, and let's talk more technical here because I want to actually explain the value that Zscaler brings to the table here, is that with the private access methodology where they host the IP space for it, right? It's a CGNet space. You don't actually know what you're connecting to, and vice versa. And so, what this allows you to do is it doesn't matter if there's common IP addresses in your network or their network. It's all being reverse proxied and it's all being translated, right? It's all the NAT's being translated. And so, right off the bat, I can deploy a bunch of app connectors out to, let's say, customer B. I'm customer A, and I can actually start gaining access, right? True access to applications. Now, I don't want to. I don't want to deprioritize actually what is actually happening there because from a technology level, there's a lot of things happening. It's not just a reverse proxy capability. It's the fact that you can identify applications as a profile, that you can apply it to a policy, that you can go as granular as saying, you know what, I only need these three employees to have access to that application in that environment, right? So there's a lot more there, and we could spend hours on all the little capabilities that really build that maturity and that access. But let's talk it from just hardcore step one, step two. You de-risk the network, right? So you can now build accessibility turnkey. Okay, great. Well, what's the second thing to that? Well, the second thing to that is now you can align to the business drivers that require certain levels of access at certain times of this integration, right, or this acquisition. And so maybe the first thing is I need mission critical access to HR systems, financial systems, sales information. And so that is something turnkey that you can do because it's already prepackaged, right? You can sit down, develop an application profile, and hopefully maybe it's just Salesforce, and Salesforce is already a configured application on Zscaler. So it allows you to quickly, at a software level, policy level, define that access on a turn of a hat and gain that access immediately. So where historically M&A would take you, you might get some levels of access right in the forefront through jump boxing and people creating reverse, NAT configurations on a
Yep.
firewall. I would say it would take you at least, if you're really good, probably a year to 2 years to accomplish just a base level network remediation and some application, awareness and access. But with Zscaler, I've been able to do this in less than 48 hours. I've been able to
Wow.
provision ZPA
Wow.
connectors in a second customer environment, sit down for about maybe 2 hours with the applications teams to define those applications and understand how it operates, and then be able to configure the policies and get my customers in customer A accessing that application customer B in less than 48 hours. I mean, that's how quickly it allows us to accelerate. Now, again, I'm not trying to say that everyone's going to achieve this in 48 hours, but again, it gives you the ability for a mature environment to be able to quickly, on a dime, provide turnkey solutions such as M&A activities.
Yep. So David, that's really impressive. You can do it that quickly. And when you said it takes 1 to 2 years, that's pretty much in line with what I experienced. Under best conditions, we got it down to 9 months, right? And
Yeah.
then, we would do 4 or 5 acquisitions a year, and it's just like you never really finished one before you were in the throes of the next one, right? So there's
You
always that
know,
going.
I it's funny you say this because and it's never stops there, right? Because
Right,
you do the acquisition and you have this kind of charter of what you needed to accomplish through the acquisition, but that evolves as time goes on. People learn more, people want more, things change, ebb and flow. That charter changes, and so the question is, you spend all this time defining what the end state is going to look like, yet there's been so many moving parts, right?
right,
Through the maturity of the acquisition, that how do you turn on a dime without impacting the outcome that you were looking for? And I think
right.
tools such as SASE, and I would say there's a cacophony of tools out there that really kind of marry into a zero trust model that can help you through this. And I think SASE is just one of those enablers that gives opportunities where it doesn't require a lot of legwork to introduce it into your environment, and yet it builds so much inner working capabilities and enablers in your organization that really define the next 5, 10 years of your strategy.
Yep. So David, I'm going to do another shift on you here. Hold
Sure.
on. Uh, One of the biggest challenges I think most people are experiencing right now is resiliency. And I say resiliency from the standpoint of we've all experienced some very large organizations being impacted by a platform going down, large platform.
Mm.
So let's talk a little bit about that, but I also want to talk about how do we do resiliency from the standpoint of some major outage and get to a disaster, recovery disaster, environment that the business can run on. How does that work, and what does Zscaler do in regards to supporting that?
Great, great. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? Do you put all your eggs in one basket? And I say that in a way that I don't want viewers to think that you really are putting your eggs in one basket, but the reality is, the more you put in line to the Zscaler environment ecosystem, the more visibility you have, the more control you have. There's a lot of advanced threat protection capabilities that come out of box for Zscaler Foundations. We talked about DLP briefly there. You can implement DLP, file time control, but at the end of the day, what are you actually doing, right? And the question then becomes, are you putting your eggs in one basket? So that's the elephant in the room, only because I don't want people to believe that putting all your eggs in this basket is what will impact the resiliency and availability of either the platform or your applications. So let's talk a little bit about how Zscaler addresses some of these things, because BCPDR is a huge topic for Zscaler. They recently, actually not even recent anymore, they now have a hosted DR tenant that customers can purchase that would build out their entire DR capabilities that's owned and run by Zscaler. So
Okay.
let's talk historically how companies interpret availability. Well, if you talked about your enterprise data centers, how did you provide resiliency? Well, from a network layer, you built additional switches and cores. You
Yep.
provisioned a secondary ISP, ensured that it's either load balanced or high availability, fail right, up and down status. Um, and then when that moved to cloud, it changed a little bit, because in cloud, you can pick a region that your compute storage sits at, but there was some more capabilities built in, such as load balancing, geo restriction, geo spacing, geo identification. All of that contribute to a better experience. And so that if one of the US East went down, which I know we just had this issue recently, right?
Yep.
uh,
Yep.
that you could fail over if you excited in US West. Same deal for any public cloud. It's not isolated to any one provider. And so again, you met with one more capability, but still you're fitting in the constructs of the limitations of physical data centers.
Right.
Okay. And so let's talk a little bit more about Zscaler and how Zscaler plays a part here, because let's first talk about the Zscaler service and its platform, right? Because it's all in cloud. Zscaler runs a ZIA cloud, they run a ZPA cloud. And then these two, although may not always be in the same data center, they're all pre-configured into your ZCC. And the beauty of that is Zscaler has implemented every single type of load balance, awareness that can be built on an endpoint. So the endpoint is now configured to look at the most well-performing clouds available to you. They no longer just map you to one cloud. They actually map you to two clouds now. And you have the
Yep.
availability to control the metrics as to when it fails over between either of those clouds. Okay, great. Now, what's the next layer? Well, Zscaler then now also offers the ability to do BC, right? BCP DR planning. And so that can be pre-built configurations within the Zscaler platform that tells it to do something else if the Zscaler cloud is not available. And so this is kind of where a lot of customers were like, wait a minute, does that mean I got to build a whole, proxy slash VPN type infrastructure in my environment? Yeah, it does. And that, that didn't really fit everyone's need. Some people needed something, a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more turnkey. I don't want to have to purchase all this infrastructure. And so this is where Zscaler has also now offered up the hosted DR capability, where based upon certain telemetry data and metrics, your client is now configured and your cloud is configured to fail over to a completely working and operating tenant. But that's not to me where the resiliency and availability, stops. I think that's just the simple access portion of this. Now you get into other conversations about how am I building resiliency in my organization for my applications, right? And this kind of falls into multiple silos. It's not just a SASE conversation at that point, but let me offer you a different way of thinking of this. If I can tell you, and let's say if you're the application owner here, and I tell you, look, you as an application owner hosting this critical application, doesn't matter where your application is, doesn't matter where you place it, doesn't matter how many places you place it in, right? The level of robustness and resiliency is all based upon your footprint, not mine anymore. Whereas historically it was a networking, right? Because if you're in a different
Yes.
data center, I need the whole new security and network stack to support that data center. And then I needed rules
Correct.
to figure out where you need to go and how things fail over. But it's no longer that story anymore. Now it's if your application is online and available, I will find a way to get access to it, right? And I will find the best performing method or transport to get you there, right? At the end of the day, John, you're sitting at a Starbucks. I can't do anything about your Starbucks. If your Starbucks connectivity is bad, then everything's going to be bad, right? That's a given.
Right.
And that's a known. We
Yes.
just need to accept that. But let's say from that Starbucks, let's say it's a great, they've got 100 megs in there and you're the only person sitting there. And let's say you got really great bandwidth. Okay. So let's say your application is sitting in one of your enterprise data centers and that data center has an internet circuit and has an MPLS circuit. What happens if that internet circuit goes down? Well, in the past, that internet circuit will probably had a firewall that was natting your public IP address to gain access to that application, right? And so let's say the internet goes down. Well, how did you resolve for that? You didn't. Because unless you had another firewall sitting somewhere else that was aware of that and now hosted your new application, which is generally a manual process, you're kind of dead in the water. Well,
Yep.
what if I told you, you know what, it might be worse in terms of performance, but I can now send you going through my main data center that has MPLS connection back into that data center. So you actually never lose that.
Right.
Performance may be impacted, but that's a measurable and visible thing that we can document, we can record and act on. But you weren't impacted because your access is still there. And so this goes back into kind of and I don't want to say self-healing because it's not necessarily self-healing, right? It's the fact that the capabilities in which that platform, in this case Zscaler, offers its services enables you to not have to worry about the underlying network, that we will self-heal our method of connectivity from the agent back to the cloud based upon what transport you have. As long as you have the ability to get out to the internet, we have a path forward. And that therein lies really the value that we're seeing is that people are starting to realize, wait a minute, I'm no longer constrained by a physical device that's supporting my network stack at that data center. Now it's, wait a minute, wherever I have some kind of network connectivity, I now have a way in to secure in the same fashion that I've been doing it primarily. But how does that impact performance? And that's something that can be measured, something that can be planned for, and something that you can actually inform your leaders and your users on. And so I
Right.
think it just really kind of helps us build a better story, a more collective story, so that everybody is aligned to what the outcomes are when things like this happen.
Yep. So, David, I'm going to follow up a little bit on that in
Sure.
terms of the BCDR type things. Every business says, "Hey, here's here's what we need in terms of a restoration time frame, whether it's 4 hours,
Hmm.
12 hours, 24 hours, or 3 days, right? And the security teams in the past, networking teams, infrastructure teams, everybody says, okay, if you want 4 hours, here's the cost for us to build a solution to get you back up. And the business always comes back and says, no, that's too much.
Of
What
course.
can we get for this, right? And so at one of the organizations I was at, they had a 24-hour requirement that says, hey, we don't need connectivity for 24 hours. We'll continue to do everything we need to do, and that's not a problem. Well, if something goes down and 15 minutes later, your phones are lighting up saying, hey, we got to have our connectivity back. Well, you said 24 hours, right? And so we moved from, the old MPLS circuits to SD-WAN, turned on the stuff there. We did all kinds of demonstrations for different things, and
Hmm.
we failed all the different circuits. And they said, hey, when are you going to start your test? And I'm like, well, you never lost connectivity because we actually built it so, like you said, it was self-healing, right?
Yep.
When we
Yep.
went to schedule a DR test in the past, they used to have to say, well, we're going to shut this down for this, and it'll come back on in this period of time. You get 6 hours to do this, and they're
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
John, when are you going to get your DR environment, ready for us to use? I'm like, it's on. It's always on. All you have to do is just start
Oh,
using
I love to
it,
use that term. Always
right?
on.
It's
Absolutely.
always on. There's nothing I need to do. You just point to the DR location versus the other
Hmm.
location. And they're like, this is really cool. I'm like, yeah, thank you. Right. So,
It's we shifted, right? We've shifted that whole dependency now. It's no longer is the network conducive and ready for failover. And it's more about, hey, it's all provisioned. Is your application set up to be survivable in that amount of time? Right.
yep.
I had a lot of these conversations when I'd be working for legal or financial companies because there are healthcare as well, obviously. There's mission critical things that just can't afford to be down more than even an hour. And
Right.
it always comes back to those type of things are it's great because with the ability to start kind of re-envisioning the way you look at your network, let's say you have an always on type of environment, networking. Now the question is no longer whether or not the network can fail over fast enough. It's, hey, your application, can it replicate fast enough to the secondary data center? Are you
Yes. Yes.
active, or are you going to back up from tape? That's going to take
Right.
time too. So
Right.
it's yeah, it's you put a little bit less pressure on the networking infrastructure now. It's more about, you know, the provisioning and the actual application and the awareness of that. So yeah, no, I think that's a good great point that you caught there, and I think that's where we're shifting to, and it's a beautiful story because it's always been the network, right?
Right. And I had another experience I'll share with you where we had some outside organization that wanted to come in. We had high availability pairs of firewalls throughout the globe, right? 62 different countries, all kinds of stuff, right? And they said, well, we're going to have to create this demonstration run to show that we can actually fail over, to the redundant firewalls, right? The HA pairs, right? And I said, we do it all the time. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, every
Yeah.
Tuesday at noon, I have a setup where we fail over to the backup ones. And they're like, what? And like, how did we get this to do this? And blah, blah, blah. I'm like, look, we pay for the high availability service. If I don't regularly demonstrate it, something could change and we won't know. And then I'm like, well, I said, have you ever had or experienced an interruption Tuesday at noon? And they're like, no. Yeah, exactly. It works fine. Schedule it whenever you
It,
want, right?
isn't that the wonderful aspect of being able to respond in that way? Is that,
Yeah,
hey, I can do this global event without actually disrupting, services. Like
right.
who, 20 years ago, imagine anyone coming up to you saying, I'm going to run a complete enterprise, DR scenario. Well, that was usually a weekend event, like the whole
Oh
weekend,
yeah.
all hands on deck. Well,
Yes.
now it's you build enough trust, you build enough fluidity in not only the way that you fail over, right? Because it's not impactful. I mean, I would argue if you want to really get down to the granular, TCP sessions may see a blip, but I would argue, you know what, some TCP sessions don't care. And it's
Right.
self-healing and you won't even notice it. But
Right.
yeah, no, we're in a point now where we are mature enough where we can start doing and building these type of environments and the infrastructure to support it without taking down the entire network.
Exactly. And the
Yeah.
other thing that David, that I learned and experienced is, despite all of pre-planning for different things, there's not been a single time where the first time we tried to fail over that it worked successfully. right? So,
Of course.
right.
Of course. Of course.
So somebody either fat fingered something, somebody didn't think about something else, the business didn't tell you, well, I need this as well as that, right? So if you don't demonstrate it and prove that it works and actually run on it, you're not going to have a great experience when you go to use it in a real DR situation.
That is the story these days. Is it's no longer, you can never point to just one team as the problem, right? We collectively as an industry, if you will, has matured enough to understand that low-hanging fruit. We can address that. We know about this, eyes wide open going into it. So those are addressed. It's really now this relationship between the capabilities that we provide here on the network and network security side, mapped back to the way that we build our applications and our servers and our services. It's no longer well, it's a network's problem because the network's not built for it. No, no. Okay, well, let's talk about the application side. Well, for high resiliency on an application, normally that would mean that there's some kind of load balancer somewhere, right?
Right.
What are you doing with that VIP? Right? Is that VIP going to change when you fail over? I mean, it's really
Yep.
more of those type of questions where you didn't, you're now at step number 3 or 4 and you're asking those questions. It's no longer stuck at step 1, step 2. We're actually asking the harder questions about, hey, okay, the network's
Right.
there, the application's going to fail over, but let's look at all those other dependent services. Like even that application access into identity. Do you still have access into like, your MFA, or hey, are you doing certificate checks? Does it still have access to stuff like that? So it's great to know that we have matured beyond the generic, is it the network? Is it the app? It's not now it's a full picture, right? You gotta understand all of it. It's no longer you can get by understanding just the network or understand just the application. We're in an area now where the best outcomes are achieved by those that have full stack understanding. They don't have to have deep knowledge, but someone
Right.
that has enough knowledge to ask the right questions. That's where we're starting to see a shift in kind of the culture of engineers are starting to engage at this level.
Yep. So David, I see we're almost at time for this session here, and maybe we'll get to do a couple more sessions because I'm
I
really
hope
enjoying
so.
this.
I hope so.
Is there some closing thoughts you want to leave?
Sure. I've been around enough to feel as though that, you know, the technology that we're seeing in today's market are true accelerators. People aren't producing capabilities or just niche anymore. They are looking at providing that holistic ability to leverage the tool for more than what it's marketed for. And I would argue that Zscaler falls well within this. I would argue that customers are not seeing the full picture of what you can achieve by introducing this type of technology. I said earlier, everyone just looks at it as, oh, it's a transformation to my network, and I've got rules now and it's better security. But I would argue, no, it's more than that, right? When did you have the opportunity to capabilities on a platform with the way that compliance evaluates risk in your organization, right? When did we have the ability to actually use some of the telemetry data that we're getting from this stuff to make actionable items, whether or not that's developing a strategy around risk score, developing a strategy around posture? So I want viewers to understand, yeah, your first 2 years is all about getting the technology out there, getting it implemented, but the real value is taking a step back and saying, how do I integrate this tool more into the day-to-day, efforts of my organization, both from a security level as well as a networking level. And there's a lot of value to be had there, operational efficiencies. They'll talk about that all day long, but we have examples. And this is where I think EliteOps plays such a pivotal role. We are not only a partner for Zscaler, but we are I consider it a scalpel knife as opposed to, right? A scalpel. We are a scalpel knife. And the beauty of this is because we've had the opportunity, and I joke about this all the time, we've taken the hits. Right, we've gotten the black eyes needed. Right, all those engineers out there that sat on 2, 3 o'clock a.m. meetings, right, to fix something. You probably learned the most during those calls because it was, baptized by fire, and you got into the nitty gritty, and you got into something that basically no one generally touches. This is where Elite Ops works well. We've had these capabilities and opportunities to work with all levels of customers in the industry, and actually go through the growing pains of implementing a branch connector, a cloud connector, implementing all these inline capabilities, having these conversations at a strategic level with executives to understand what are you actually doing with this initiative, right? Are you just doing a checkbox, or is there an overarching framework that you'd like to kind of enter into a digital transformation into? Or even at the engineering level, is opening up the eyes of the engineer, looking at this as a cultural change. Because let's be honest, you introduce something like this, and it's a different way that your organization needs to support this. You can no longer just have a historical networking and a security team, and because at that point you're just passing tickets around back and forth.
Yeah.
So I would argue, for those out there, and this is something that we definitely promote here at EliteOps, is this is also a cultural change, right? This is not just a change to technology. This is a change in the way that your organization looks at uh, technology and how it impacts things like network security, governance, and being able to marry all this stuff and unify it under one stack, as opposed to having different silos. And I'm not saying different silos doesn't work, right? But you got to change the way that you think about this technology. It's no longer, it's a multifaceted capability, and it needs that level of respect, right? You can't just look at this as a network-based solution and apply network-based capabilities. No, you got to expand. You got to think about how security operates in the space. You got to figure out what is the user experience and the intent of what you're doing. You got to understand, what does this risk mean to your business? So I encourage everyone out there to spend the time, understand that no matter what, industry you're in, no matter where you started from, whether it's network or security, this is your opportunity, right? This is your opportunity truly to unify the stack and have better understanding end to end about how this technology provides value to your business.
Yeah. David, you made me smile when you said the surgical knife for doing
Yeah.
the stuff you're doing. And I smile because I've coined a phrase when I do incident response preparations for organizations and coach them on how to do stuff. I've coined the phrase a surgical axe, right? The incident
Oh.
response team needs to swing a surgical axe, and everybody's like, what does that mean? I'm like, well, you're chopping off so that it doesn't get any worse, right? But if I'm chopping off an
Indeed.
arm, I have to do it in a manner that I can reattach that arm and still get functionality out of it. So that's
That's
why
true.
when you said
That is
surgical
true.
knife, it made my heart sing a little bit on that. So, David, I want to
Brilliant.
thank you for this conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I would very much enjoy another conversation down the road with you on this type of stuff. So,
John, it was a privilege and honor. I enjoy these type of collaboration. Love to continue on these conversations. And I want to thank you for asking really great questions today.
all right, thank you, David. Have a good day
Thank
now.
you.
All
Take
righty,
care.
bye now.